Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder what your eyes are actually doing when you are just looking around? Not really trying to do anything specific. Well, this new study dives deep into that very question, and what they found might surprise you. Imagine you are just chilling, maybe looking out a bus window or at a picture. You are not searching for anything, not counting anything. You are just free viewing for a long time. Researchers thought your eyes just went to the brightest or most colorful parts of a scene. But this new research suggests something much more interesting is going on. The scientists here believe that when you are looking around freely, your brain has a default mission to understand the scene. And to do that, your eyes are actually directing themselves to the parts of the image that are most important for figuring out what is happening overall, not just the parts that are visually striking. They call these objects critical to scene understanding. To understand this, they created a really clever set of images. They called these vinaigrette images. Think of them like little visual puzzles. They would take a photo and make a tiny change to it, like moving an object slightly or changing a posture. This tiny change would completely flip the meaning of the scene, what the scene was about. But they made sure the overall brightness or the meaningfulness of individual little spots in the picture didn't change much. For example, one image might show someone fixing a remote control, and another visually very similar image might be interpreted very differently. This way, they could see if eye movements changed when the understanding of the scene changed, even if the basic visual features stayed the same. Then, they had groups of people look at these images. There were 4 different groups or conditions. One group just did what we call free viewing. They just looked at the images. Another group was asked to describe what was happening in the scene. A third group had to search for a specific object, and the fourth group had to count objects. By comparing where people looked in each of these groups, they could see if free viewing was more like describing the scene or more like searching or counting. And here is the first big finding: when people were just free viewing, where their eyes went was much more similar to where people's eyes went when they were asked to describe the scene. It was less similar to where people looked when they were searching or counting. This strongly suggests that even when you don't have a specific task, your brain is trying to understand what is going on, just like it would if it had to describe it. Think of it like your brain having a built-in scene comprehension mode. Remember those tricky vinaigrette images that change meaning with tiny visual tweaks? Well, the researchers found that these images had a big effect on where people looked during free viewing and scene description. The eye tracking patterns changed for these images, but they didn't change as much for the searching or counting groups. This further solidifies the idea that free viewing is about understanding the scene because it is sensitive to changes in that meaning. If you were just looking at bright spots, these sorts of meaning changes wouldn't matter as much. So how did they figure out which objects were critical to scene understanding? They came up with a very cool method. They would take an image, then digitally remove one object at a time. They had people describe what was happening in the images with the objects removed. Then they compared these descriptions to the description of the original full image. If removing an object drastically changed the description, like if you removed the remote from the picture of someone changing batteries, then that object was deemed critical to scene understanding. If removing it barely changed the description, it was considered irrelevant. They even used AI language models to help compare how similar the descriptions were. Now, for the really interesting part, where did people actually look during free viewing compared to these critical objects? They found that people looked at the scene understanding relevant objects way more often than at objects that were deemed scene understanding irrelevant. This was true for both free viewing and scene description. This also held up when they compared it to smart computer models that predict where people look based on visual saliency or general meaningfulness. The critical objects were fixated more, even if they weren't the brightest or the most locally interesting. Now, you might think, but wait, don't people just follow other people's gaze or hands? And that is a good point. The researchers thought of that too. In some of their images, a person was looking at or reaching for something. They did an extra experiment to check this. They found that even in scenes where the gaze or hand cues didn't point to the most important object for understanding the scene, people still tended to look at that critical object during free viewing. While gaze can be a cue, it seems the drive to understand the scene is even stronger. They even did a specific analysis on images where the gaze wasn't clearly pointing to the scene's main point, and the pattern still held. This is where it gets really powerful. They asked themselves, does looking at these critical objects actually cause better understanding? To find out, they did another experiment. They had people look at an image for a very short time, just 500 milliseconds, and specifically force their eyes to fixate on either a critical object or an irrelevant object. Then they asked them to describe the scene. The results were striking. When people were forced to look at the critical objects, their descriptions were much more accurate, much closer to what was actually happening. This suggests that directing your gaze to these key elements isn't just a byproduct of understanding. It is actively helping you understand. And what about people themselves? We often look at faces and bodies in images, right? The researchers found that people are indeed fixated on the most, even more than other critical objects. This makes sense because in many of their test images, removing the person or their hands had the biggest impact on understanding the scene. So fixating on people is also a major part of this scene comprehension strategy. So what does this all mean? It means that your seemingly aimless eye movements during previewing aren't so aimless after all. They're part of a sophisticated default strategy of your brain to make sense of the world. Your curious mind, when not given a specific task, is actively seeking out the information it needs to build a complete picture. It is not just about what is bright or colorful. It is about what helps you tell the story of the scene. This research provides a really strong theoretical framework for understanding why we look where we look when we're just taking it all in. The computer models that only look at basic visual features or local meaningfulness just can't capture this. Of course, every study has its limits. The images they used really focused on scenes with people and actions, which is a big part of our lives. They mentioned that for simpler scenes like a plain landscape with no immediate action, your eye movements might behave differently, perhaps being less driven by specific critical objects. Also, how individual people and different cultures understand scenes might play a role. And this study, while large, might not capture all those nuances. But the core message is powerful. When you are not looking for something specific, your brain is hard at work, trying to understand. Your eyes are not just wandering, they are on a mission to gather the most important information to build a cohesive mental model of the world around you. It's like your mind is saying, let me figure this out, and your eyes are the tools it uses to get the job done. This is a fundamental way we learn, infer, and predict what is happening, and it is happening constantly, even when we think we're just relaxing. What a fascinating insight into our own visual curiosity. What do you guys think? Does this change how you look at the world around you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed diving into this research with me, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more science deep dives, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the wonders of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.